Detective Marcus Chen thought he had seen everything in his 15 years on the force. The precinct in downtown Seattle had exposed him to every type of criminal, from petty thieves to hardened murderers. But nothing prepared him for what would unfold on that cold November morning when Officer Jake Morrison brought in what appeared to be just another homeless man. The man shuffled into the station wearing torn jeans, a stained jacket that smelled of cigarettes and cheap alcohol, and boots held together with duct tape. His beard was unkempt, his hair greasy and matted. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept in days. To everyone watching, he looked like countless other vagrants who cycled through their holding cells. "Found him sleeping behind Murphy's Diner again," Morrison announced, guiding the man toward the booking area. "Same guy we warned last week about trespassing." The vagrant kept his head down, mumbling incoherently as they processed him. His name, according to the fake identification he carried, was Robert Bobby Williams. He had no permanent address, no emergency contacts, and no apparent means of income. The booking officer barely looked up from his paperwork as he filled out the standard forms. What none of them knew was that Bobby Williams was actually Special Agent David Rodriguez, a 12-year veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. For the past 8 months, he had been living this carefully constructed lie as part of Operation Clean Sweep, an undercover investigation targeting corruption within the Seattle Police Department. The FBI had received numerous complaints about officers taking bribes, planting evidence, and covering up crimes committed by their fellow cops. Internal Affairs had tried to investigate, but every time they got close to uncovering something significant, witnesses would disappear, or evidence would mysteriously vanish. It became clear that someone with significant influence was protecting the corrupt. Officers Agent Rodriguez had volunteered for the dangerous assignment after his own brother had been beaten by corrupt cops in Chicago 5 years earlier. The case had been covered up, and his brother never received justice. This mission was personal for him, but he maintained the professional distance necessary to do his job effectively. His transformation into Bobby Williams had been meticulous. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit had studied the patterns and mannerisms of longtime homeless individuals. Rodriguez had lost 30 pounds, grown out his hair and beard, and spent weeks learning to mimic the speech patterns and body language of someone living on the streets. The fake identity came complete with a fabricated criminal history, minor offenses like public intoxication, trespassing, and shoplifting. Nothing serious enough to warrant extended jail time, but enough to make him a familiar face in the system. The FBI had even arranged for him to be arrested in neighboring cities to establish his background. Living on the streets had been harder than Rodriguez had expected. The cold Seattle nights tested his resolve, and the constant hunger gnawed at him. But these hardships made his cover more authentic. Other homeless individuals accepted him as one of their own, and eventually, he began to overhear conversations that proved invaluable to his investigation. Through his street contacts, Rodriguez learned about a network of officers who were providing protection to drug dealers in exchange for substantial payments. The same officers were also involved in stealing money and drugs during raids, keeping the profits for themselves instead of logging everything as evidence. The corruption went deeper than anyone had suspected. Rodriguez discovered that certain officers were deliberately targeting honest cops who might expose their activities. They would plant drugs or stolen goods in the lockers or cars of clean officers, then discover the evidence during routine inspections. Several good cops had lost their jobs and pensions due to these frame-ups. As Bobby Williams, Rodriguez had witnessed Detective Chen accepting an envelope of cash from a known drug dealer named Tony Marsala. The exchange happened in the alley behind Murphy's Diner, the same location where he was frequently found sleeping. Rodriguez had chosen that spot specifically because it provided a clear view of the meeting place the corrupt officers used. The irony wasn't lost on him as Officer Morrison led him to the holding cell. Morrison himself was one of the officers under investigation. Rodriguez had observed him stealing money from crime scenes and intimidating witnesses to keep them quiet. Now Morrison was treating him like just another piece of human garbage that needed to be swept off the streets. Rodriguez knew that maintaining his cover was crucial, even in custody. One slip of his carefully constructed persona could blow the entire operation and potentially get him killed. The corrupt officers wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatened their profitable scheme. In the holding cell, Rodriguez continued his act perfectly. He mumbled to himself, scratched constantly as if he had lice, and asked repeatedly when he would be released. The other inmates gave him a wide berth, assuming he was mentally unstable or suffering from drug withdrawal. What worried Rodriguez most was that his FBI handler, Agent Sarah Mitchell, wouldn't be able to contact him while he was in custody. They had established a communication protocol using coded messages left at various locations around the city, but being locked up disrupted their schedule. Mitchell would assume something had gone wrong if he missed their next scheduled contact. The investigation had reached a critical phase. Rodriguez had gathered enough evidence to expose the corruption, but he needed a few more pieces to complete the puzzle. He had identified the ringleader, a veteran sergeant named Patrick O'Sullivan who seemed to be coordinating the entire operation. O'Sullivan was careful and paranoid, making it difficult to gather direct evidence against him. Rodriguez had also learned that the corrupt officers were planning something big. He had overheard fragments of conversations suggesting they were going to eliminate someone who posed a threat to their operation. He suspected it might be another undercover officer, or perhaps an internal affairs investigator, who was getting too close to the truth. As he sat in the holding cell, surrounded by the very officers he was investigating, Rodriguez realized how precarious his situation had become. If anyone discovered his true identity, he wouldn't live to see morning. The corrupt cops had already demonstrated their willingness to kill to protect their secrets. The cell was cold and uncomfortable, but Rodriguez had endured worse conditions during his months on the street. He closed his eyes and tried to rest, knowing he needed to stay alert for any opportunity to continue his investigation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and he had to be ready for whatever came next. Outside his cell, the police station continued its daily operations, unaware that they were housing the very person who would soon bring down their house of cards. The fluorescent lights in the holding cell buzzed constantly, creating an annoying backdrop to the sounds of the busy police station. Agent Rodriguez, still playing his role as Bobby Williams, had been locked up for 18 hours when Detective Chen approached his cell with a clipboard and a stern expression. "All right, Bobby," Chen said, unlocking the cell door. "You're coming with me for questioning." Rodriguez shuffled out of the cell, maintaining his homeless persona with practiced ease. His back ached from sleeping on the concrete bench, but the discomfort helped make his performance more convincing. Chen led him to a small interrogation room that smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes. The room was bare, except for a metal table and 2 chairs. A mirror covered one wall, obviously a one-way window for observation. Rodriguez knew the drill from his FBI training, but he had to pretend to be confused and intimidated by the formal setting. "Sit down," Chen ordered, pointing to the chair across from him. "We need to talk about what you've been doing behind Murphy's Diner." Rodriguez slumped into the chair and avoided eye contact, mumbling under his breath like someone who was mentally unstable. Inside, however, his mind was sharp and focused. This interrogation presented both an opportunity and a danger. He might learn something useful about the corruption investigation, but he also risked exposing his true identity if he made any mistakes. "I wasn't doing nothing wrong," Rodriguez said in the slurred speech he had perfected over months of practice. "Just trying to sleep." "Ain't no law against sleeping." Chen leaned forward, studying Rodriguez's face carefully. "That's the thing, Bobby. We've had reports of you watching people, taking notes. That doesn't sound like sleeping to me." Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. Someone had been watching him while he was watching them. He had been careful to only observe from a distance and had never written anything down in public. Either Chen was fishing for information, or the corrupt officers were more paranoid and observant than he had realized. "Don't know what you're talking about," Rodriguez replied, scratching his beard nervously. "My head ain't right sometimes. Maybe I was just looking around, you know. Sometimes I see things that ain't there." Chen's expression softened slightly. "What kind of things do you see, Bobby?" This was Rodriguez's chance to plant some seeds without appearing suspicious. "Sometimes I see police officers doing things they shouldn't be doing. But like I said, my head ain't right. Probably just imagining things." "What kind of things?" Chen pressed, leaning closer. Rodriguez hesitated as if he was unsure whether to speak. "Money changing hands. People in uniforms talking to bad people. But nobody believes old Bobby anyway." Chen sat back in his chair and Rodriguez could see the wheels turning in the detective's mind. Was Chen trying to determine if Rodriguez was a potential witness to corruption, or was he part of the corrupt network trying to assess how much Rodriguez knew? The interrogation continued for another hour, with Chen asking increasingly specific questions about Rodriguez's observations. Rodriguez walked a careful line, providing just enough detail to seem credible while maintaining his mentally unstable persona. He described seeing uniformed people meeting with bad people, but claimed his memory was fuzzy and unreliable. During the questioning, Officer Morrison entered the room and whispered something in Chen's ear. Rodriguez couldn't hear what was said, but Chen's expression became more serious. Morrison left, and Chen turned his attention back to Rodriguez with renewed intensity. "Bobby, I'm going to ask you something important, and I need you to think carefully before you answer," Chen said. "Have you ever seen anyone taking pictures or recording what goes on behind Murphy's diner?" Rodriguez's heart rate increased, but he kept his expression blank. "Pictures? Who'd want pictures of old Bobby? I ain't exactly photogenic." He attempted a weak laugh that turned into a coughing fit. Chen wasn't satisfied. "Not pictures of you. Pictures of other people. Maybe someone pretending to be homeless but actually working for someone else." The question hit too close to home. Rodriguez realized they suspected there might be an undercover operation in progress. He had to deflect suspicion without arousing further interest. "Mister, I can barely remember what I had for breakfast," Rodriguez said, tapping his temple with a dirty finger. "You think I'm going to remember if somebody was taking pictures?" "My brain's fried from years on the streets." Chen studied Rodriguez for several more minutes, then closed his notebook. "Okay, Bobby, we're going to let you go with a warning. But I want you to stay away from Murphy's diner. If we find you there again, you'll be spending a lot more time in jail." Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir, officer, sir. I'll find somewhere else to sleep. Don't want no more trouble." As Chen prepared to leave, Rodriguez made a calculated decision. "Officer, can I ask you something?" Chen paused at the door. "What?" "Those people I sometimes see doing bad things. Should I tell someone about that? I mean, if it's real and not just my crazy brain making things up." Chen's expression became unreadable. "What kind of bad things, Bobby?" Rodriguez lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Well, sometimes I see people in police uniforms taking money from drug dealers. But maybe that's normal? Maybe that's how you catch the bad guys?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. Rodriguez couldn't tell if the detective was shocked by the revelation or calculating how to respond to protect the corrupt network. "No, Bobby," Chen finally said. "That's not normal. That's not how we catch bad guys. Should I tell someone if I see it again?" Rodriguez asked innocently. Chen hesitated, and Rodriguez could see an internal struggle playing out on the detective's face. "You know what? Maybe it's better if you don't mention things like that to other officers. Some people might not understand that your memory isn't reliable." Rodriguez nodded as if he understood, but internally he was processing this crucial piece of information. Chen's response suggested he might not be part of the corrupt network after all. In fact, Chen might be trying to protect Rodriguez from retaliation if word got out that he was talking about police corruption. The processing for Rodriguez's release took another 2 hours. During that time, he observed the interactions between various officers, looking for signs of who might be involved in the corruption. He noticed that certain officers seemed to avoid each other, while others communicated through subtle gestures and coded language. Sergeant O'Sullivan, the man Rodriguez suspected of being the ringleader, made an appearance in the booking area while Rodriguez was signing his release papers. O'Sullivan was a large man with graying hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to assess everyone and everything around him. O'Sullivan glanced at Rodriguez dismissively, seeing only another homeless troublemaker. "Make sure this one understands he's not welcome around Murphy's anymore," he told the booking officer. "We've had too many complaints from the business owners in that area." "Yes, sir," the booking officer replied. Detective Chen already gave him the warning. O'Sullivan nodded and walked away, but not before Rodriguez noticed him exchange a meaningful look with Officer Morrison. It was a brief moment, but it confirmed Rodriguez's suspicions about Morrison's involvement in the corrupt network. As Rodriguez was finally escorted out of the police station, he felt both relief and renewed determination. His cover remained intact, but the investigation had become more dangerous. The corrupt officers were clearly suspicious about potential surveillance, and they were taking steps to protect themselves. Walking back onto the Seattle streets, Rodriguez resumed his homeless persona completely. He shuffled toward the downtown area, looking for a new place to establish his base of operations. Murphy's Diner was now off limits, but he needed to maintain his surveillance of the corrupt officers. The next phase of his investigation would require even more caution and creativity. 3 days after his release from custody, Agent Rodriguez had established a new surveillance position near the waterfront district. An abandoned warehouse provided perfect cover, allowing him to observe police activities while remaining hidden from view. The building had been condemned months earlier, making it an ideal location for someone like Bobby Williams to seek shelter. Rodriguez had missed 2 scheduled contacts with his FBI handler, Agent Sarah Mitchell, and he knew she would be worried. Their communication system required him to leave coded messages at specific locations throughout the city, but his arrest had disrupted the carefully planned schedule. He needed to re-establish contact without blowing his cover or alerting the corrupt officers to FBI involvement. The warehouse was cold and damp, with broken windows that let in the November rain. Rodriguez had found some cardboard and old newspapers to create a makeshift bed in one corner. To any casual observer, it would appear that a homeless man had simply found shelter from the weather. The reality was that he had chosen this location because it provided clear sightlines to 3 different police patrol routes. From his position, Rodriguez could see the back entrance to Murphy's Diner, where the corrupt officers continued to conduct their business. He had also identified a new meeting location, a parking garage 2 blocks away, where Detective Chen and Sergeant O'Sullivan had been spotted together on multiple occasions, using a small pair of binoculars disguised as broken electronics. Rodriguez documented the corrupt network's activities. He had observed money changing hands between officers and known criminals at least 6 times since establishing his new position. The corruption was more extensive than even the FBI had suspected. On his 4th night in the warehouse, Rodriguez heard footsteps approaching his hiding spot. He quickly concealed his surveillance equipment and assumed the position of a sleeping vagrant. Through half-closed eyes, he watched as 2 figures entered the building with flashlights. "Check the corners," one voice said. "Chief wants this place cleared before the city condemns it officially." Rodriguez recognized the voice as Officer Morrison. The second person was someone he hadn't seen before, a younger officer with nervous energy who kept glancing around as if expecting trouble. "Why can't we just let the city handle this?" the younger officer asked. "It's not like homeless people are hurting anyone by sleeping in here." Morrison's laugh was cold and bitter. "Kid, you've got a lot to learn about how this job really works. Sometimes we need places like this to stay empty for business reasons." The 2 officers moved closer to Rodriguez's corner, and he forced himself to breathe slowly and evenly like someone in deep sleep. Morrison's flashlight beam passed over him briefly before moving on. "Should we wake him up and tell him to move along?" the younger officer asked. "Nah, it's just Bobby Williams," Morrison replied dismissively. "Harmless old drunk. He'll move on his own when it gets too cold." Rodriguez felt a mix of relief and concern. His cover was holding, but Morrison's comment about needing the warehouse empty for business reasons suggested the corrupt officers were planning to use this location for their illegal activities. If that happened, his surveillance position would be compromised. After the officers left, Rodriguez remained still for another hour before carefully retrieving his hidden equipment. He needed to contact Agent Mitchell immediately to report this development and request backup surveillance options. The next morning, Rodriguez made his way to Pike Place Market using the meandering route of a homeless person looking for food scraps. The market was crowded with early morning shoppers, providing perfect cover for leaving coded messages. He purchased a newspaper from a vendor and left it at a predetermined location with specific markings that would alert Agent Mitchell to check their emergency communication protocol. While waiting for a response from his handler, Rodriguez continued his surveillance activities from various locations around the city. He had learned to move constantly, never staying in one place long enough to attract attention or establish a pattern that the corrupt officers might notice. His investigation had revealed that the corruption network operated like a small criminal organization within the police department. Sergeant O'Sullivan was definitely the leader, with about 8 officers under his control. They had divided the city into territories, with each corrupt officer responsible for collecting bribes and protection money from criminals operating in their assigned areas. The network had also infiltrated the evidence lockup, allowing them to steal drugs and money that should have been logged as evidence in criminal cases. Rodriguez had observed officers entering the lockup after hours and leaving with packages that were clearly not part of any official investigation. More disturbing was Rodriguez's discovery that the corrupt officers were targeting honest cops who might expose their activities. He had seen Detective Chen meeting with internal affairs investigators, which suggested that Chen might be building his own case against the corrupt network. This made Chen a potential target for retaliation. On his 6th day after the warehouse encounter, Rodriguez received a response from Agent Mitchell through their coded communication system. The message was brief but clear. Package delivered. New location available. Same schedule. The message meant that Mitchell had received his report and arranged for a new safe house where Rodriguez could conduct his surveillance. The location would be communicated through their established protocol within 24 hours. That evening, while searching for food behind a restaurant, Rodriguez was approached by another homeless man named Eddie, who had become something of a friend during his months on the streets. Eddie was a Vietnam veteran with mental health issues who had been living rough for over a decade. "Bobby, you need to be careful," Eddie said quietly, glancing around nervously. "Word on the street is that some cops are looking for someone. They're asking questions about new faces, people who might not be what they seem." Rodriguez felt his blood run cold, but he maintained his character. "What kind of questions?" "They're offering money to anyone who can identify someone who doesn't belong, someone who might be watching them or asking too many questions." Eddie scratched his beard thoughtfully. "I told them I didn't know nothing, but you should watch yourself. You've been asking a lot of questions lately about police activities." Rodriguez realized he had made a critical error. In his effort to gather intelligence, he had been too obvious about his interest in police corruption. Other homeless individuals had noticed his behavior and reported it to the corrupt officers, who were now actively searching for an undercover investigator. "Thanks for the warning, Eddie," Rodriguez said. "I'll be more careful." Eddie nodded and shuffled away into the darkness, leaving Rodriguez alone with the terrifying realization that his cover might be blown. The corrupt officers knew someone was watching them, and they were closing in on his identity. Rodriguez spent the rest of the night moving from location to location, avoiding his usual spots and trying to think like a truly paranoid homeless person. He needed to contact Agent Mitchell again to warn her about the heightened security measures. But he also needed to maintain his investigation until the FBI could move in with arrests. The corruption network had become aware of the threat, which meant they would either shut down their activities temporarily or take more aggressive action to eliminate the perceived danger. Rodriguez suspected they would choose the latter option, making his situation extremely precarious. As dawn broke over Seattle, Rodriguez found temporary shelter in a different abandoned building, this one closer to the police station. Ironically, hiding near his enemies might be the safest option until he could figure out his next move. The investigation had reached a critical turning point, and Rodriguez knew that the next few days would determine whether Operation Clean Sweep succeeded or whether he would become another casualty in the war against police corruption. Agent Rodriguez had been hiding in the new abandoned building for 2 days when he witnessed something that changed everything. Through a crack in the boarded-up window, he watched Detective Chen meeting with Agent Sarah Mitchell in broad daylight, outside a coffee shop just 3 blocks from the police station. The meeting appeared casual, 2 people sharing coffee and conversation, but Rodriguez recognized his FBI handler immediately despite her civilian disguise. Chen was gesturing animatedly, clearly upset about something, while Mitchell listened intently and took notes on what appeared to be a regular notebook. Rodriguez's mind raced with implications. Either Chen had somehow discovered Mitchell's identity and was confronting her, or Chen was actually working with the FBI as an informant. If it was the latter, it would explain Chen's careful questions during the interrogation, and his warnings about not talking to other officers about corruption. The meeting lasted approximately 15 minutes before both individuals went their separate ways. Chen returned toward the police station while Mitchell walked in the opposite direction. Rodriguez waited another hour before carefully making his way to their emergency communication drop point to see if Mitchell had left any messages. The designated location, A loose brick in an alley wall. Behind a grocery store, Rodriguez found a coded message that confirmed his suspicions. Mitchell had written, "Friend confirmed. Package contents verified. Delivery scheduled soon." The message meant that Detective Chen was indeed working as an FBI informant, and that the information Rodriguez had gathered through his undercover work was being corroborated by Chen's inside knowledge. The reference to delivery scheduled soon indicated that arrests were being planned. Rodriguez felt both relief and urgency. Relief that he wasn't working alone and that Chen was an ally rather than an enemy. Urgency because the corrupt officers were actively searching for an undercover investigator, and arrests needed to happen before his cover was completely blown. That evening, Rodriguez positioned himself near the waterfront where he had observed previous meetings between corrupt officers. His new location was a fishing pier that had been closed for repairs, providing excellent visibility while maintaining his cover as a homeless person seeking shelter from the rain. Around midnight, Rodriguez observed a meeting that exceeded his worst expectations. Sergeant O'Sullivan, Officer Morrison, and 6 other officers gathered in the parking lot of a closed seafood restaurant. They were joined by Tony Marsala, the drug dealer Rodriguez had seen paying bribes to Detective Chen months earlier. Using his concealed recording equipment, Rodriguez documented the conversation as best he could from his distant position. While he couldn't hear specific words, the body language and gestures made it clear that serious planning was taking place. O'Sullivan appeared to be giving instructions while the other officers listened intently. The meeting concluded with handshakes and what appeared to be the distribution of assignments. Each officer received an envelope from O'Sullivan before the group dispersed. Rodriguez waited until everyone had left before moving to a position where he could potentially follow one of the vehicles. Officer Morrison was the last to leave, and Rodriguez managed to observe him driving toward the residential district where several police officers lived. Morrison stopped at a house that Rodriguez recognized as Detective Chen's address based on personnel, records he had memorized during his FBI briefing. Rodriguez's blood ran cold as he realized what was happening. The corrupt officers had identified Chen as a threat and were planning some kind of retaliation. Morrison parked across the street from Chen's house and appeared to be conducting surveillance. Rodriguez faced an agonizing decision. Maintaining his cover meant staying hidden and documenting what he observed. But if Chen was in immediate danger, Rodriguez had a moral obligation to act, even if it meant blowing his cover and jeopardizing the entire investigation. He decided to compromise by moving closer to Chen's neighborhood while maintaining his homeless persona. If Morrison or other corrupt officers made any aggressive moves toward Chen's house, Rodriguez would have to intervene somehow. For 3 hours, Rodriguez watched Morrison conduct surveillance on Chen's residence. Around 3:30 a.m., Morrison was joined by 2 other officers Rodriguez didn't recognize. The 3 men appeared to be planning some kind of coordinated action. Rodriguez made a desperate decision. He approached the area while playing his role as a confused homeless person, stumbling and talking to himself loudly enough to attract attention. His goal was to create a distraction that might disrupt whatever the corrupt officers were planning. "Who's out there?" Morrison called out as Rodriguez shuffled past their position. "Hey, you! Stop right there." Rodriguez continued his act, pretending to be disoriented and possibly intoxicated. "Just looking for a place to sleep, officer. Don't mean no harm to nobody." Morrison approached with his flashlight, shining it directly in Rodriguez's face. Well, if it isn't our friend Bobby Williams. What are you doing in this neighborhood?" "Got lost," Rodriguez slurred, squinting in the bright light. "Thought this was downtown. Everything looks the same in the dark." One of the other officers joined Morrison. "Should we run him in for vagrancy?" Morrison studied Rodriguez carefully, and Rodriguez could see suspicion growing in the corrupt officer's eyes. "You know, Bobby, you've been turning up in a lot of interesting places lately. Behind Murphy's Diner near the waterfront and now here. That's quite a coincidence." Rodriguez's heart pounded, but he maintained his character. "I just walk around, officer. Got nowhere else to go. Sometimes I remember places from when I was younger." "Is that right?" Morrison stepped closer, his hand moving toward his weapon. "And what exactly do you remember about this neighborhood?" Before Rodriguez could answer, porch lights began turning on in several houses, including Chen's residence. The noise and commotion had awakened the neighbors, creating the distraction Rodriguez had hoped for. Chen appeared on his front porch, clearly alert despite the early hour. Rodriguez could see that Chen was armed and prepared for trouble. The detective's eyes swept the street, taking in the scene of 3 officers confronting a homeless man in front of his house. "Is there a problem here?" Chen called out, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet neighborhood. Morrison cursed under his breath, realizing that their surveillance operation had been compromised. "No problem, detective. Just dealing with a vagrant who got lost." Chen walked toward the group, studying Rodriguez carefully. "Isn't that Bobby Williams? The homeless guy we questioned a few days ago?" "The same one," Morrison confirmed. "Seems he has a habit of showing up in strange places at strange times." Rodriguez could feel the tension escalating dangerously. Both Morrison and Chen were armed, and the situation could turn violent at any moment. He needed to defuse the confrontation without revealing his true identity. "I'm sorry, officers," Rodriguez said, backing away slowly. "I didn't mean to cause no trouble. I'll just move along and find somewhere else to sleep." Chen made a decision that surprised everyone. "Actually, Bobby, why don't you come inside for a few minutes? It's cold out here, and I can make you some coffee before you go on your way." Morrison's expression darkened. "Detective, I don't think that's a good idea. This man could be dangerous. He's just a harmless drunk," Chen replied firmly. "Besides, it's my house and my decision." Rodriguez realized that Chen was trying to protect him without revealing their connection through Agent Mitchell. The detective had recognized the dangerous situation and was offering sanctuary. The standoff continued for several tense seconds before Morrison made his choice. "Fine, but we'll be keeping an eye on things." As Rodriguez followed Chen toward the house, he could feel Morrison's hostile stare burning into his back. The corrupt officer suspected something, and Rodriguez knew that his time undercover was running out rapidly. Inside Detective Chen's modest living room, Rodriguez maintained his homeless persona even though they were alone. Chen poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured for Rodriguez to sit on the couch, but both men remained tense, aware that the corrupt officers might still be watching the house. "You can drop the act now," Chen said quietly, closing the curtains. "Agent Mitchell told me everything about Operation Clean Sweep." Rodriguez studied Chen's face carefully before responding. "I don't know what you're talking about, detective. I'm just Bobby Williams looking for a warm place to sleep." Chen smiled grimly. "Agent Rodriguez, we don't have time for games. Those officers outside aren't here by coincidence. They're planning to kill me tonight, and probably you too, once they figure out who you really are." The use of his real name convinced Rodriguez that Chen was legitimate. He dropped the homeless act and sat up straighter, his FBI training taking over. "How long have you been working with Agent Mitchell?" 6 months, Chen replied. "Ever since my partner was murdered for getting too close to O'Sullivan's operation. Internal Affairs tried to make it look like a drug deal gone wrong, but I knew better." Rodriguez nodded, understanding the personal motivation that had driven Chen to cooperate with the FBI. "What did you learn from Agent Mitchell today?" Chen moved to the window and peered carefully through the curtains. Morrison's vehicle was still parked across the street, and Rodriguez could see the glow of cigarettes indicating the corrupt officers were maintaining their surveillance. "The FBI is planning to make arrests tomorrow night," Chen said, "but that timeline just got moved up. Mitchell received intelligence that O'Sullivan is planning to eliminate both of us within the next 24 hours. "How did they identify me as FBI?" Rodriguez asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Your questions to the other homeless people were too focused and specific. Someone reported that Bobby Williams seemed unusually interested in police activities and had better observation skills than a typical vagrant." Chen paused at the window. "O'Sullivan put together a task force to find the undercover investigator. They've been systematically checking every homeless person who's appeared in the area during the past year." Rodriguez cursed silently. His months of careful preparation and cover building had been undone by his eagerness to gather intelligence. "So what's the plan now?" Chen moved away from the window and picked up a secure phone from a drawer. "Mitchell is coordinating with Seattle FBI field office to execute the arrests tonight instead of tomorrow. They're mobilizing tactical teams to round up all the corrupt officers simultaneously. What about us? We're sitting ducks here. Mitchell is sending backup, but they need at least 2 hours to get into position." Chen checked his watch. "It's 4:15 a.m. now. We need to stay alive until approximately 6:30. Rodriguez moved to another window and observed the street from a different angle, I count at least 4 vehicles positioned around your house. They're not just conducting surveillance, they're preparing for an assault. Chen's expression became grim. O'Sullivan doesn't take chances. If he's decided we need to die, he'll use enough firepower to ensure we don't survive. The two men spent the next few minutes checking Chen's house for defensive positions and potential escape routes. Chen had a small arsenal of legal firearms, including 2 rifles and several handguns with adequate ammunition. Rodriguez felt more confident knowing they could defend themselves if necessary. At 4:45 a.m., the corrupt officers made their move. Rodriguez spotted movement in the shadows as armed figures began approaching the house from multiple directions. "They're coming," he announced, grabbing one of Chen's rifles. Chen turned off all the lights and activated a recording device he had hidden in his living room. "If we don't make it through this, at least there will be evidence of what happened." The first shots shattered the front windows, sending glass flying across the living room. Rodriguez and Chen took cover behind an overturned couch and returned fire toward the muzzle flashes visible in the darkness outside. "This is Detective Marcus Chen," Chen shouted toward the broken windows. "I'm a sworn police officer and I'm calling for backup." Officer Morrison's voice came from outside. "Save it, Chen. Nobody's coming to help you. You and your homeless friend are going to die tonight." The gunfight continued for 20 minutes, with the corrupt officers maintaining positions around the house while Rodriguez and Chen defended from inside. Several neighbors had called 911, but Rodriguez suspected that O'Sullivan had used his influence to delay the response of honest officers. During a lull in the shooting, Rodriguez heard vehicles approaching rapidly from the east. For a moment, he feared that more corrupt officers were arriving to join the assault. Instead, he heard Agent Mitchell's voice through a bullhorn. "FBI, all suspects lay down your weapons immediately." The response from the corrupt officers was a renewed barrage of gunfire, now directed at both the house and the FBI vehicles. Rodriguez could see tactical teams moving into position with professional precision, their advanced equipment and training clearly superior to the corrupt officers' desperate assault. Agent Mitchell's voice cut through the chaos again. "Agent Rodriguez, Detective Chen, identify your positions. Living room, northwest corner," Rodriguez shouted back, maintaining his cover behind the overturned furniture. The FBI tactical teams moved with coordinated efficiency, using flashbang grenades and superior firepower to overwhelm the corrupt officers. Within minutes, the gunfire outside had stopped, replaced by commands to surrender and the sounds of arrests being made. Rodriguez and Chen emerged from their defensive positions as FBI agents secured the house. Agent Mitchell entered through the destroyed front door, her expression showing both relief and professional satisfaction. "Are you both injured?" she asked, surveying the bullet-riddled living room. "We're fine," Chen replied, though his hands were shaking from adrenaline. "How many did you get?" "All of them," Mitchell confirmed. "Morrison, O'Sullivan, and 6 other officers are in custody. We also arrested Tony Marsala and 3 other criminals who were part of the bribery network." Rodriguez felt a mixture of exhaustion and accomplishment. 8 months of living on the streets, enduring cold and hunger, and maintaining a dangerous cover had finally paid off. The corrupt officers who had been terrorizing Seattle's citizens and honest police officers were now facing federal charges. "What about the evidence we gathered?" Rodriguez asked. Mitchell smiled. "Between your surveillance reports, Detective Chen's inside information, and the recording equipment that captured tonight's assault, we have enough evidence to ensure lengthy prison sentences for everyone involved." As dawn broke over Seattle, Rodriguez finally dropped his Bobby Williams persona completely. FBI agents provided him with clean clothes and medical attention for minor cuts from flying glass. The transformation from vagrant to federal agent was startling. Neighbors who had watched the gunfight could barely believe that the homeless man they had seen was actually an undercover investigator. Detective Chen faced a difficult transition as well. His cover as an FBI informant had been blown, making it impossible for him to continue working with the Seattle Police Department. However, Agent Mitchell informed him that the FBI was offering him a position as a federal investigator, recognizing his valuable contributions to the case. The aftermath of Operation Clean Sweep sent shockwaves through the Seattle Police Department and law enforcement agencies across the country. Internal Affairs launched a comprehensive review of department procedures. while the FBI implemented new protocols for detecting and investigating police corruption. Rodriguez spent 3 days being debriefed by FBI officials, providing detailed accounts of everything he had observed during his months undercover. His recordings and photographs were analyzed by federal prosecutors building cases against the arrested officers. The media attention was intense, but carefully managed. The FBI released limited information about the operation, while protecting the identity of witnesses and informants who had helped expose the corruption. Rodriguez's role remained classified, with official reports referring to him only as an undercover federal agent. For Rodriguez, the successful conclusion of Operation Clean Sweep was both professionally satisfying and personally healing. The corrupt officers who had escaped justice for years were now facing federal prosecution. More importantly, honest police officers like Detective Chen could continue their work without fear of retaliation from corrupt colleagues. The final tally of the investigation was impressive. 8 police officers arrested, 12 civilians charged with bribing public officials, over $2 million in stolen drugs and money recovered, and 17 criminal cases that had been compromised by corruption now reopened for proper prosecution. As Rodriguez prepared to return to FBI headquarters for reassignment, he reflected on the lessons learned during his time as Bobby Williams. The experience had given him profound insights into both the vulnerability of homeless populations and the critical importance of police integrity in maintaining public trust. Agent Mitchell approached him as he packed his few remaining belongings from the safe house where he was staying during debriefing. The director wanted me to tell you personally that Operation Clean Sweep is being considered for a special common. 6 months after Operation Clean Sweep, Agent David Rodriguez sat in a federal courthouse in Seattle, watching as the last of the corrupt officers received their sentences. Sergeant Patrick O'Sullivan, the ringleader of the corruption network, had just been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was packed with honest police officers, FBI agents, and citizens whose lives had been affected by the corruption. Rodriguez wore his standard FBI suit and tie, a stark contrast to the ragged clothing he had worn as Bobby Williams. Few people in the courtroom realized that the professional-looking federal agent had spent 8 months living on the streets to gather the evidence that made these convictions possible. Officer Jake Morrison received 18 years for his role in the conspiracy, including charges related to the attempted murder of Rodriguez and Detective Chen. The judge specifically noted Morrison's betrayal of his oath to protect and serve when announcing the sentence. Detective Marcus Chen sat beside Rodriguez in the gallery. No longer wearing a police uniform, Chen had accepted the FBI's offer to join the federal law enforcement team and was completing his training at Quantico. The transition from local detective to federal agent had been challenging, but Chen found satisfaction in working cases that crossed jurisdictional boundaries. "Hard to believe it's finally over," Chen whispered, as the last defendant was led away in handcuffs. Rodriguez nodded, though he knew the case's impact would continue for years. The corruption network had compromised dozens of criminal cases, and prosecutors were still working to determine which convictions needed to be reviewed or overturned. Several innocent people had already been released from prison after evidence surfaced that corrupt officers had planted drugs or fabricated testimony. Agent Sarah Mitchell approached them as the courtroom began to empty. "The director wanted me to give you both this," she said, handing them each a letter bearing the FBI seal. Rodriguez opened his letter and read the formal commendation for exceptional service in Operation Clean Sweep. The recognition was gratifying, but more important was the knowledge that their work had made a real difference in Seattle's law enforcement community. "What's next for you, Rodriguez?" Mitchell asked. "I'm being assigned to the Public Corruption Unit in Washington, D.C., Rodriguez replied. "Apparently, my experience with deep cover operations has made me valuable for future investigations." The irony wasn't lost on him. His success at pretending to be Bobby Williams had earned him a reputation as one of the FBI's most effective undercover agents. He had already been briefed on 3 potential assignments involving corrupt officials in other cities. As they left the courthouse, Rodriguez reflected on the lessons he had learned during his time on Seattle's streets. The experience had changed his perspective on homelessness, showing him that people living on the streets were often invisible to those in positions of power. That invisibility had been his greatest asset as an undercover agent, but it had also revealed troubling truths about how society treats its most vulnerable citizens. Eddie, the homeless Vietnam veteran who had warned Rodriguez about the corrupt officer's search for an undercover investigator, had been a key witness during the trial. The FBI had arranged for Eddie to receive mental health treatment and temporary housing, though he remained skeptical about government help after decades of being failed by various social service systems. "You did good, Bobby," Eddie had told Rodriguez during one court appearance, using the name he had known during their months on the streets together. "Maybe some of those honest cops will treat people like me with more respect now." Rodriguez had made a personal commitment to ensure that the FBI's future undercover operations would include protocols for protecting homeless individuals who provided assistance. Too often, these vulnerable witnesses were forgotten once investigations concluded. The media coverage of Operation Clean Sweep had been extensive but careful. Reporters focused on the corruption charges and sentences while respecting the FBI's need to protect its investigative methods. Rodriguez's identity as Bobby Williams remained classified, though several news outlets had speculated about the undercover federal agent whose work had been crucial to the case's success. One unintended consequence of the investigation was increased attention to police corruption in other cities. Citizen groups and reform organizations had used the Seattle case as evidence that systematic corruption could exist anywhere, leading to increased scrutiny of law enforcement agencies nationwide. Rodriguez had received letters from FBI field offices in Chicago, Detroit, and New Orleans, all requesting consultation on potential corruption investigations. His expertise in assuming false identities and operating in hostile environments had become a valuable resource for the Bureau. 3 weeks after the sentencing hearing, Rodriguez was walking through downtown Seattle, preparing for his transfer to Washington, D.C. when he encountered a familiar face. A homeless man approached him outside a coffee shop, and it took Rodriguez a moment to recognize him without the context of street surroundings. "Agent Rodriguez?" the man asked tentatively. "It's Jimmy. We met when you were Bobby." Rodriguez remembered Jimmy as one of the homeless individuals who had shared information about police activities during his undercover assignment. "Jimmy, good to see you. How are you doing?" "Better, thanks to you," Jimmy replied. "That detective who worked with you, Chen, he's been coming around checking on folks, making sure the new cops treat us right. Never had a police officer actually care about what happened to people like me." The conversation reminded Rodriguez why he had chosen law enforcement as a career. The technical aspects of investigation were important, but the real measure of success was how the work affected people's daily lives. As Rodriguez boarded his flight to Washington, D.C. the next day, he carried with him more than just his FBI credentials and case files. He had learned that effective undercover work required more than just assuming a false identity. It demanded genuine understanding of the people and communities being protected. His new assignment in the public corruption unit would involve different challenges, but Rodriguez felt confident that his experience as Bobby Williams had prepared him for whatever came next. The homeless vagrant who had been arrested outside Murphy's Diner had been transformed not just into a federal agent, but into someone who understood that justice required protecting society's most vulnerable members. The FBI had gained a valuable asset in their fight against corruption, but Rodriguez had gained something even more important: the knowledge that his work could make a real difference in people's lives. One case at a time, Seattle's police department continued implementing reforms based on the lessons learned from Operation Clean Sweep. The corrupt network that had operated with impunity for years was gone, replaced by enhanced oversight and accountability measures that helped restore public trust in law enforcement. For Rodriguez, the case represented both an ending and a beginning. Bobby Williams was gone forever, but the insights and experiences of those 8 months on the streets would influence every investigation for the rest of his career. The vagrant who had been dismissed and ignored had ultimately brought down one of the most sophisticated police corruption networks in the country's recent history.